Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. The Right Honourable Brian Mulroney served as Prime Minister of Canada from 1984 to 1993, leading the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to the largest majority victory in Canadian history. Since leaving active public life, Mr. Mulroney has enjoyed a very successful career in business, both here in Canada and abroad, and the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney joins me now for a chat in Montreal about his life beyond politics. Mr. Mulroney, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be with you, Catherine.
I know you don't do these really ever, you've said, so I am doubly grateful for the privilege today. You know, I had a question. You were christened Martin Brian Mulroney, and I wonder why you're not called Martin. Why was it Brian?
I don't know. I think my mother just decided that that it would be Brian. My father was born in Saint Catherine de Portneuf, and he was baptized by the local curé at the church as Benoit Martin.
Of course.
Because it was an Irish community, but commingled with the French speakers in the village, and so. But he used Ben Mulroney, and I wound up using Brian, although my first name was Martin.
You just mentioned the French aspect, the commingling of both French and English, and you grew up in an environment that had that commingling as well. And yet, did you speak English at home for the most part?
For the most part, yes. Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's been a really incredible piece of your own history, the fact that you have been able to be adopted as a native son of both Anglophones and Francophones. You are equally adept in both languages. How did that come to be?
Well, I think it was one of the flukes of life, you know. I was born in Baie Comeau, and it was that kind of a little town, French and English. And in fact, those who went to the English Catholic schools, which I did in part, the English Catholic school was a classroom located in a French-speaking Catholic school.
So was it really?
It really
a classroom?
Yeah, it
oh
was
my goodness.
Classroom, one or two
Yes.
classrooms. So that it wasn't as if we had a separate school. So we were always together.
Right.
And in the playgrounds and on the streets and playing hockey and everything. So I did this for a while in Baie Comeau, and then I spoke English at St. X when I went down to St. Thomas High School and then St. X University. But then I came back to Quebec to do law school at l'Université Laval, and then I was back in an entirely French milieu.
Right.
So by the time I wound up across the street here in the mid-'60s, having graduated from law school and become a lawyer, I was kind of like a bifurcated Canadian, linguistically anyway, and just always functioned in both languages. But what you said was interesting, because later on in life, while I was in office, they did a series of polls, and it was interesting because I'd never seen it before or heard of it. The question was something along the lines, do you think Brian Mulroney is an English Canadian or a French Canadian? And the English Canadians said, about 99%, we think he's English. And the French Canadians, 99%, we think he's French.
Isn't that great?
So, you know, I had never seen it before, so it kind of worked out well.
In the beginning...
Unplanned, by the way.
In the beginning, you were talking about your dad,
Yeah.
and I'd love to know more about your parents, your mom and dad, your dad was an electrician, as I understand it, in Baie Comeau.
Yeah.
And what was he like?
He was a great man. He was my hero. As I say, he was born in Saint Catherine de Portneuf, and he became an electrician. Worked at Donnacona, and then at High Falls. Married my mother. They had a baby who died in High Falls, not far from Ottawa.
Right.
And then my sister was born there. And then the Depression hit big time, and he was looking for a job, and they were building Baie Comeau, a paper mill. So he said, well, I'll go down to Baie Comeau as a construction electrician, make a little money, look after my wife and kids, growing family, and then I'll come back to Quebec City. But down in Baie Comeau, it worked out well. The employees, permanent employees, were offered little houses, mill houses, and good jobs, and there was a hospital they built. So he decided to stay. And I was born there. I was number 3, and then there were 3 more kids. After a while, he worked in the paper mill, the Quebec North Shore paper mill. You know, he couldn't hack it in terms of the financial requirements. So he opened a little business. It was called Saguenay Electric. And he'd work in the paper mill all day, and he'd come home, have a bowl of soup. I always remember him in these cold Baie Comeau evenings in February, freezing, snowbanks up to there. And he'd come home, and off he'd go again with his little truck, and he wired homes and fixed oil burners and this until about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Then he'd come back, go to bed, get up at 6, and head for the paper mill again. So he was a great man, and I miss him to this day.
Your mom would have also had her work cut out for her too then, because with your dad working so hard, she would have been home with all of you. I'm sure there are days she would have happily traded places with your father. Yeah. How many of you were in the house? Were you?
Well,
were
I'll
you
tell
6?
You, there were my mother and father. Yeah. 6 kids.
Wow.
And a boarder.
And a boarder.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
My mom took in a boarder because of, to try and make ends meet.
Yes.
My father had the second job. My mother had this. And it was quite a thing.
I bet.
And I'll always remember when I became Prime Minister, I represented my hometown, and we all went back there, and the media insisted that I go in and introduce them to the owner of the house that my dad had,
right,
where we lived.
Sure, where you grew up.
Yeah, where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can't do that. It's owned by, let's go. So we all showed up, and
I'm sure.
the media, and the new owner let us in. And,
really?
And Mark, who was about this high, about 5, I guess, at the time, and this had not been his style of life.
Right.
He wasn't particularly used to this, and so.
And he made an unfiltered comment.
So we that's right. So he went around as with everybody, and they took pictures of it. And when it was over, we were standing across the street looking at the house, and they were asking me questions, what I thought of it, and what kind of memories it evoked, and so on. And then Craig Oliver said to Mark, I was standing there, I was holding his hand, and said, and my heart sank.
I bet.
He said, Mark, what did you think of the house? And Mark said, well, he said, I thought it was very nice. He said it was very nice and clean, and he said the colors on the walls were very, very lovely. He said, he looked at me and said, but Daddy, where do you live? I said, thanks a lot.
That's lovely.
Yeah, he just had a different view of the world.
Well, it's interesting because in your memoir you note that your father described your family's financial status as sort of poor. Mm-hmm. Your dad said, yeah, we're sort of poor. And I wondered, as a child, did you remember that? Were you aware of the fact that your family couldn't afford everything that they wanted to afford?
Well, not really, because pretty well everyone else at Baie Comeau was in the same boat.
Right.
There was a certain amount of commonality in our lifestyle. Everybody worked at the paper mill. Everyone was paid Thursday afternoon, and so we all had the same problems. And so, no, I didn't really know it. I knew that because we had 6 kids in a tiny home, we had to go double duty. I always had a job after school from the time I was 10 or 12, I guess. And I even had a job over and above that, delivering the circulars on pay night, which was Thursday night for the Hudson's Bay Company, and I got $4 for doing, my part of town, and snowstorms and everything. And I had.
Is this when you conscripted your sisters?
My two sisters.
Did you ever pay them for it?
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't. I didn't, because all the money went to my mom.
Okay.
So she, any pay that they got came from my mother.
Okay.
I remember it was $4 a week that we got for that, and Olive and Peggy would come out with me and help me. And
in your book, you said it was your first encounter with feminism.
I got berated. That's right.
Yeah, isn't that something? You offered once to your father that you could go out and get a job to help with the family, and he said no. Why did he say no?
Well, the Quebec North Shore Paper Company had a policy of hiring the children of the employees, and they introduced an excellent apprenticeship program, and it was very popular with the employees because it gave their kids a great opportunity, a leg up on terms of future employment. And you could train to be an electrician, a mechanic, un ferblantier, a menuisier. They had the whole panoply of the trades, and I could see what was happening at home. It was very tough on my mother and father, and we had 3 younger ones after me coming along. So I said to my father on a Sunday night, which was startup day in the paper mill industry, I said, look, this is a great program. He said, yeah, it is, very good. And I said, I think I should consider packing it in on the university side, getting a job and helping out for a while, and then I can go back. And my father said, Brian, look, we need the money, thank you very much, and so on. But no, the only way out of a paper mill town is through a university door, and you're going to keep going to university. That was the end of it.
Must have been a pretty good motivator for you.
It was.
Yeah.
Oh no, he was an inspiration.
Yeah.
I think I record in my memoirs that the night of my first election as Prime Minister, I was in a hotel home about 200 or 300 yards away from that little house I told you about.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sleep, obviously, with what was going on. And all I could think of was my father. Because in a paper mill town in those days, our lives were governed by the mill whistle. The whistle rang at 3 minutes to 7 in the morning, and that summoned everybody to work. And that kind of thing. And here I'm lying there, and it's pouring rain on the 4th of September, 1984. And I'm lying there and listening on the radio to what's happening. And I'm kind of at the center of it, but it's hard for me to, I'm kind of removed from it. It's an out-of-body experience. And all I could think of was all of a sudden the mill whistle rings. And all I could think of was, what would my father think of this?
Yeah.
What would he say this morning? Getting up, going to work, and saying, look what happened last night. So, as I said earlier, he was a marvelous guy and a great inspiration to us all.
You did go on to university, and you became a lawyer, and you were doing very well in your career as a lawyer. You were young and young father, young husband. And then the Cliche Commission came along, and your profile was raised, probably in an entirely unanticipated way, by this commission, which really captivated certainly people within Quebec and probably people across the country. Was it at that point that you considered a political career? Was it at that point that you were approached? I mean, I know you'd been involved in university, but...
Catherine, I was involved, with your dad when we were 16.
Yeah, not too many years ago.
That's right. But we were both essentially on the periphery.
Yes.
Both of us, and I'm sure we thought about it from time to time. But I certainly didn't have any plan, and so least of all when I was on the Cliche Commission, because
But that was when people
That's
began
right.
approaching you.
It took
certainly.
off.
Right.
The Clich Commission was an explosive royal commission dealing
Right.
with crime and violence in the construction industry in Quebec, and it became the equivalent of a soap opera every night on Quebec television. And so the three commissioners, of whom I was one, became quite famous in Quebec. And so it was as a result of that I got the profile that one day led some of my friends to say, well, when Mr. Stanfield stood down, that you should run for this. I thought they were out of their minds, and as it turned out, they were. But self-delusion is eventually quite a part of one's personality if you want to be a leadership candidate for any party.
Sure.
So I ran, was defeated, came back to Montreal here. Left the law practice because I was offered the presidency of the Iron Ore Company of Canada, which I then crossed the street to do and spent 8 years there.
Wow. You know, when you became Prime Minister, you had young children.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that politics is either easier when you enter it when you have tiny kids so that they don't know the difference, or older kids so that they can choose to be involved or not. But for your kids, they would have been at an age where they knew this city, they knew, they had friends, they had social networks established. Was it difficult as a family to move to Ottawa to take on this new life?
It was, because we were all so happy in Montreal in those days. Pretty carefree life. I mean, I was in my 30s, president of one of the great companies of Canada, and we had a wonderful life, and everyone was happy. So when we moved to Ottawa, it was different. On the other hand, when I became Prime Minister, it worked out well because of the ages of the children, and 24 Sussex became a sanctuary for us. You know, the kids knew that I was being shot at all the time by the media and what have you outside, and the occasional unkind thing was said about me. But you know, they got used to it. They grew up in it. They learned to consider the source. And at night when I would come home, it was family time. You know, and it was almost like a mentality like us against the world kind of thing. The kids were always there defending me and protecting me kind of thing.
I think that's the job of a kid.
I think you know what I'm talking about. And so that's the way it turned out. So we had a very happy time. Yeah. There, and Nicholas was born while we were there.
That's right, and that was for Canadians a real event.
It really
because
was.
It had been, I mean, gosh, I don't even know if there had been a child.
Well, the Trudeaus.
Or was it the Trudeaus?
Yeah, the Trudeaus were there, but it had been 25 years at least, 30 years or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? Did the kids? Well, I guess I should ask: was it tough for you to try to balance what is a very, very busy and demanding life, and being a dad, being able to do the things with your kids that a dad who works a 9-to-5 job might be able to do, the hockey, the skating, the dance classes? Was it tough for you to balance both of those sides of your life?
Well, it was, because you have a sense of loss when you have to do things. A G7 occurs in Tokyo. You got to be in Tokyo,
right,
for 10 days or the 2 weeks it takes. That said, Mila was determined that there would be no damage done to our family by this experience. So the focus was on the children at all times.
Right.
And by her, principally, and by me.
Right.
And so all of our spare time was devoted to the children, because Mila always said, this stuff that we're going through, it's interesting and it's important and so on, but it is entirely peripheral to the fundamental issue in our lives, namely, what are our kids going to be like 20 years from now? What kind of lives will they have? And will they be hurt and damaged by this experience, or will they flourish? And so she focused an enormous amount of every part of the attention of our lives on the kids. And I learned to do it myself. and enjoyed the experience.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. We're still, as you may know, there are 4 kids now, all of them married. We have soon to be 10 grandchildren, and we're just as close as. Look,
you are a very close family. But I think that's also somewhat, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I think that's somewhat politics as well. I think that, you know how you describe the aspect of coming home and the kids had heard the criticisms, but they considered the source or they defended you. I think politics does that to a family. You become closer. I guess you can go one of 2 ways. You can have a rupture or you can become a very close unit.
Yeah.
And you were a successful family in that regard.
I think that's absolutely true. We, in the sense that, to this day, it would be a very, very rare occasion for me on any given day not to speak to the 4 children that day. Every day.
Right.
7 days a week. As soon as I pass a phone, I realize I haven't spoken to Nicholas yet. I'll give him a quick call.
Right.
And it's an important part of our. Well, it's part of our DNA now. You talk about the kids following things. Mark was always pretty careful, and he followed everything, including the question period and what have you. I'll always remember coming home one day after a pretty brutal question period, and Mark was there. He opened the door, and he said, Dad, I guess he was 6 or 7 years old, whatever. He said, question period? He said, I watched it all. He said, you were good. He said, you were very good. Mr. Mazankowski, he was terrific.
Was that a good spirit reel?
So it puts you right in your place.
Absolutely. Do you miss active political life,
No,
or are you happy with what you do?
Not at all.
You don't.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I had a good run at it. I was their prime minister for almost 9 years. I had the time to do. We had some successes and we had some failures. That's life.
Yeah.
And I have no regrets. I think that the government and our activities, where we did a lot of big things internationally and domestically, we look a little better in hindsight as the time goes on, and we did our best for Canada, and I'm happy with that. I have no desire or no interest at all in anything that's really going on in that nature, but I follow it. I like to see. I admire people who are in politics.
It's a big commitment.
And I'm glad to be out of it.
Yeah. Tell me about your health. You've had some health scares.
I had a big one about 7 years ago when I just about bought the farm.
Right.
I came down with a very serious illness, and I just about died here. And I was in the hospital for 4 months, and then it was another 6 months, I think, of rehabilitation to try and get back. Then I got over that, and then 3 years ago I came down with diabetes.
And it was a real surprise for you, wasn't it?
Complete surprise.
Yeah.
But I learned to deal with that.
Quite gracefully. I watched a special that you did with CTV, and I was quite impressed by some of the things that you managed to do.
Well,
self-administer your medication and with a lunch menu in front of you.
Well,
I think that's highly impressive.
It was a new challenge for me, Catherine, look, I was told you have one or two alternatives.
Yes.
You're in a restaurant, which I do every day. You're in a restaurant having lunch, and at the time, I had to inject myself at that time. And so you can either get up, go to the washroom, take off your shirt or what have you, and then fill this thing up and inject yourself in the stomach right here. Or one of the doctors, including Dr. David Mulder, told me of one of his doctors, young doctors, who would do it by using the menu at lunch. And so I said, what's that about? And so he told me. And so I learned how to, at lunch, when everybody else was talking, I'd hold the menu up, I'd unbutton my shirt, and I'd give myself the insulin shot right there.
Mr. Mulroney, if I ever see you eating lunch and holding up a menu, I will walk a wide circle around you.
You'll know what I'm doing.
I'll give you your time. You know, I have a final quick question, and it's just a personal interest of mine. You've kept a journal, it seems, and certainly through your memoirs, there were excerpts of your journal throughout. Why did you do that?
Well, I really didn't keep a daily journal.
No.
I didn't do that. But right off the bat, I realized in some of the meetings, I began with, for example, in Moncton, New Brunswick, the day after I was sworn in, I think it was the day after, with Her Majesty and Prince Philip. She said some things that really startled me, and I thought I would just do a little page or two for my own archives. And I went from there to lunch at the White House with President Reagan. I wasn't used to this kind of stuff. And so I began on important matters, jotting things down. And the exception to it was, if I was going to make a major trip or do something important happened in life, I would either do it immediately or within days I would sit down, I'd write out, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 pages, handwritten pages of impressionistic things, you know, what the weather was like and who said what to whom and what Margaret Thatcher was wearing that day when she was overthrown in Paris, that kind of thing. And
are you glad you did?
Well, what happened was that when it came time to do the memoirs,
oh my gosh,
I had something like 12 or 1,400 pages. I had
something?
never reread them.
Wow.
That was like a treasure trove.
You must have had very happy editors.
Oh, did I ever? And I think that it kind of spiced things up because, you know, I found that my memory can be lousy. I try to remember things, but if it's right there, like, for example, I'm thinking of the first time I met with Deng Xiaoping in 1986 in China. Well, you know, he was the great modernizer of China, and I was privileged to meet with him for a long period of time. So I did 50 or 60 pages of what he said to me and what he said about Canada and what his views were on the Soviet Union and Gorbachev and so on at the time. And when you look back on it and you say, my God, he said this on the 20th of May, 1986, and look what happened. So the notes were very, very valuable, but I didn't do it, I didn't have a diary that said, well, this morning I had cornflakes.
Yes,
I didn't do anything like that. But I wound up with some pretty good notes.
Mr. Mulroney, I so appreciate that you would take the time to be here today. It's been a great pleasure to chat with you.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be with you, to see you again.
Well,
when I see you, it brings back fond memories.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here with you.
Congratulations on your good work here.
Thank you.